Okay, welcome everyone today to the Lunch and Learn from the Paediatric Society of New Zealand. The New Zealand Child and Youth Clinical Networks are hosting this. We should do the next slide, Fee. Thanks. Just if you've already been part of the Lunch and Learn series that's been running for most of this year, you'll know that the Paediatric Society is an organisation of health professionals working to progress the health and wellbeing of children in New Zealand, and our Lunch and Learn series is part of the Child Development and Disability Clinical Network. The Paediatric Society offers lots of opportunities for education grants and a way to connect with other professionals with interests and special interest groups, of which we are sort of one, the Child and Youth group. And the next slide, B. And so
well, that's what I've got.
Oh, there's supposed to be another page that that talks about our next one. So the next, the one for next year, so is going to be, I think it's the 8th of February, but if the slide comes up at the end, it's the second Tuesday in February 2021, and we have Colette Muir, Dr. Colette Muir speaking to us about transition, which was postponed there. So now I would like to welcome you all today. Thank you very much to Dr. Fee Graham, who's going to talk to us today about how participation focused is usual care in paediatric rehabilitation in New Zealand and where to next. So welcome, Fee, and thank you very much.
Thanks,
just quickly put any questions in the chat that you may have for Fee. There'll be like 5-minute question time at the end. And as Fee drew your attention to at the beginning on the invitation or the flyer, there is a link to the discussion page, which is up and running today. It's a Padlet page. Some people in DHB seem to be blocked from accessing that. So feel free to put your questions in the chat. And then there's the other live link at the bottom of the flyer, which is where we're capturing information and feedback from people about future things that they'll be interested in hearing about and opportunities for connecting with our group. Thanks, Fee.
Thank you, Jane. Now, am I sharing the correct screen?
Yep, help us.
It's not glowing for me. Great. So, tēnā koutou katoa, nau mai haere mai, and welcome to our presentation today. So this presentation I'm going to share with you today is the findings from a observation study that myself and my colleagues, Emily Timothy and Jonathan Williman, completed a couple of years ago with a range of services in New Zealand, looking at the extent that child development services, services provided to children with neurodisability in New Zealand, targeted participation in life situations as is recommended in international best practice. So I'm Fee Graham, I'm an academic at the University of Otago. I teach interprofessional rehabilitation at a postgraduate level and run papers in paediatric neurodisability. So why would we ask a question like this anyway? What is useful and what makes the participation focus of services a priority in the delivery of paediatric services? The terminology about participation, it comes from the ICF, the International Classification of Functioning for Disability and Health, that is promoted by the World Health Organization as their framework for understanding, categorizing, recording the extent of health and disability services internationally. This framework is widely used as a framework for not only rehabilitation services, but this is the first level of a multi-layered framework for gathering information about what the needs are internationally, how resources are used, but also importantly for us as clinicians, how research is designed and understood the way it is presented and analysed in the publications that we will be looking at when we're trying to keep abreast of evidence-based best practice in our respective areas. So understanding this framework is actually really critical to being able to digest research evidence that we should be cognizant of for our particular clinical areas. It's a combination of a bio, psycho and social model of disability and health. So the right-hand side of the ICF refers to the more social and contextual elements that impact on a person's experience of health and disability and their ability to maintain health and to participate in society, whereas the left reflects the body structure function changes at the cellular level and at the mechanical level within the body. And it's recognised that a person's ability to be able to do the things that are important to them to do in life is affected by both the social and the bio and medical. So within this, in the context of outcomes for any health interventions, health or education for that matter, the argument here is that the concept of participation, which is shorthand for participation in life situations, doing the things that are important in everyday life, is the ultimate outcome of any health or disability intervention. So in some sense, that is the target that all health professionals should be working towards. And it should in the sense that the changes to the ability to be able to participate in society, to take part in meaningful valued life roles, social roles, to be a part of the community and a valued member of society at whatever age and stage a person is at, is the outcome that matters most to people with disability and to their families as well. And partly for that reason, it is widely regarded as best practice in paediatric rehabilitation and rehabilitation more generally, that the goals and the focus of intervention that we're working with clients, with families, reflects changes to the capacity to participate, the ability to participate. So sorry, I use the word capacity. It's not about the capacity to, it's that they actually do. So not that they could play soccer in a soccer team, it's that they are playing soccer in a soccer team, if that's something that is really valuable to the child, for example. So participation might be described as that they can do something more often. They play in the soccer team more frequently, for example, that they're more satisfied with the experience that they're having, that they take part to a greater extent. They have a for whatever that means for them. So take up a position on the field rather than sit on the sidelines holding the oranges parked in their wheelchair. And this very much is singing from the same hymn sheet as the presentation from Gayla Kilgore in her PhD work a couple of weeks ago through this forum as well, where she's delved very deeply, extending the work of Christine Imms, based in Australia, who's very much leading this area of research internationally. And so historically, interventions, and many have been in paediatric rehabilitation, have been designed, many of them designed to make changes to body structures and functions. So an intervention that was aimed at targeting muscle tone, for example, is one that's reflecting changes, is aiming to make changes in body structures and body functions. The other focus that therapists might often take is a focus around activity. So a child is able to do something more competently at the tabletop in the clinic, for example, would be an example of an activity. Where a target of intervention reflects participation in life roles, that is where the context in everyday life, home, school or community, is explicitly stated in the goal or in the target of therapy, that would reflect participation in life situations. So one of the key underpinning reasons we undertook this study is nothing had been done in this area. So it was unclear whether there was a need for training, development resources or further research in this area. So we needed to know what usual care was. So to illustrate the points I was just making about how the ICF might apply. Statements such as this on the in the red here would reflect changes in body structures and functions. So it's not to say these things aren't significant or important, but they're not the ultimate outcome of rehabilitation or any other health intervention. That is the priority outcome. Activities would reflect things like being able to do up buttons. Participation, on the other hand, would be able to dress oneself in the morning, be able to do up the buttons during dressing in the morning at home. Environmental factors might be to replace a headset, to complete a home visit, to install a visual chart in the home. These are all strategies that change the environment that we hope might enable participation in the lived environment, but they're not the goal in themselves. So those key concepts, and again that that Gayla was referring to in the last one of the previous presentations, is the idea of participating in society means that I have somewhere to be, someone to love, and something to do, that I have a positive identity because I am a part of things. I have roles, I am valued, I take part in things with others, I'm connected, I'm expected by people to be at places because I'm a valued member of a group. So it's these kinds of concepts that are being tapped into there in relation to participation. And this is the kind of things that might look like where in a pragmatic way in relation to goal statements in a rehabilitation environment. It's really clear what the child will be doing and where they will be doing it, and even better, the extent that they're going to be doing it, if it was going to meet some of the other widely regarded good qualities of good goals that are just specific and so on. So that's the reason why we did the study. And how did we do it? Well, we used a tool, a clinical audit tool specifically designed for looking at participation in the rehabilitation context, and actually specifically for paediatric rehabilitation, developed by Colin and colleagues in the UK, but it could be used in more beyond paediatrics. So I had the pleasure of seeing this presented at a conference in the UK several years ago, and I thought, and their findings were that the extent that clinicians were focusing on participation outcomes was quite low. And at about the same time, another study came out of Canada, also by Dana Anaby, and it also found that the extent that clinicians focused on participation was quite low, about 30% of the time. And I thought that sounded very low, and I wondered what it would have been like in New Zealand, particularly with our diverse funder models, and in particular thinking about the ACC funding model in New Zealand, where they have some quite clear directions about the way that they are to frame goals with families. And so I went about essentially a replication study of that. So who we wanted to take part in, as I alluded to, I was interested to know, did the funder and the policies required of those funders impact on the extent that goals were participation focused in New Zealand? So these sectors will be familiar to everyone here, I'm sure. Key points of distinction are also, apart from the funder focus, these are all publicly funded systems, but I was also really interested in private sector, because people often make the comment that in some of my external training, people have often commented, oh, but nobody wants to pay for that. Focusing on participation, they're wanting me to focus on the specific, they're hiring me for my expertise in understanding the body parts really well. So I don't think that that's what families really want, as a common sort of statement. That's who we sought. We weren't able to attract any interest from the education sector for this study. Don't know whether that was a recruitment strategy or other things going on there. And so we did manage to attract involvement from all of the other sectors. We had very high interest from health, so child development services around the country, and we turned many services away to take part in this study. And ultimately we only had 2. They're fairly big services compared to the others, so you can see they make up nearly half of the group, and we had really wonderfully strong interest from one large ACC provider as well. I'm not, I don't disclose the specific sites or anything in this presentation or any of the publications from this study. If you've got any questions as we go through, do throw them in the chat, and Jane will draw my attention to those as needed, and also put them on the Padlet page, which is on the invitation to this presentation that you received. The Padlet page also has a copy of the full manuscript of the study, by the way, if you're interested in reading any more details. So who did we got? We ended up allowing 5 services to take part. Altogether, there were 48 clinicians, 222 children, and 368 goal examples were extracted by the fabulous auditors within the services, who generously gave up their time to audit their colleagues' notes. As you can see, the majority were OTs, and that spread pretty much reflects the spread of, the proportion of roles within paediatric rehabilitation services. So no surprises there. And just for your reference, most of the auditors were actually physiotherapists, but there was a mixture of professions involved in that as well. So who took part? So this is really important. Who did these findings actually relate to? They were a highly experienced set of clinicians that represented people in leadership roles within the services. So it does suggest sort of quite dominant ways of working. What did we find? What we were looking at, remember, was the extent that an activity in a life context was represented in the goals. So overall, findings were very similar to the UK and to Canada. About 30% of the goal given as examples through the audit and through as part of a questionnaire to clinicians, we asked to give an example of what they considered a participation focused goal, and of those also about 30% in fact met the criteria of an activity in the context of the child's life as clearly stated. So here's some examples, and you could see that these are not necessarily super specific sleep routines, but where we gave the therapist the benefit of the doubt wherever we could, essentially. Anything that was really clearly was a discrete isolated activity that was rated as activity, or categorized, I should say, as activity. And so that made up the largest proportion of goals, and it wasn't clear though whether that was something that the child might perform in front of the therapist under ideal conditions, which is what is the signature of activity in the ICF, or represented participation in a life situation, home, school or community. Quite a high proportion, just over 10%, reflected changes to the environment, such as issue the wheelchair, arrange the headset. So it was more like the therapist's to-do list rather than what you might call a therapeutic goal. And about 24% of what was written was uncodable. And that was with 3 clinicians trying to code them. So things like we did the COPM, the Canadian Occupational Performance Measure, which is not codable. So in short, about 30% of examples reflected participation using 2 different systems of gathering what clinicians were doing, and about 10% of what therapists documented or proposed as goals were in fact tasks that the therapist planned to do. There's considerable misunderstanding, therefore, about what is participation in life roles and activities in the lived environment. And I think this figure here around the examples that therapists gave when we asked them specifically, give us an example of participation-focused practice, attests to that really clearly. We looked at it by funder to see whether that was a significant factor in the way that participation was targeted. So boxes in the red indicate areas are very sort of low performance, which I guess you would say, in terms of how participation focused and clear goals were. Boxes that are coloured in green indicate high performing areas. So overall, what we can see here is that there was one standout service, and it was there was no particular features about that service. They were a publicly funded child development service that essentially predicted the quality of goals and how participation focused they were. The one private service that took part, just note that there were only 2 therapists from that service, so it's a small sample, but they performed very highly, which suggests that people are indeed very happy to pay for participation focused services. The other thing to highlight here, however, is that all services performed very highly in the association between did the therapy that was described in case notes match the goals? And by and large, they did. So goals drive the focus of therapy. If goals describe, for example, impairments in body structures and functions, therapy tends to follow that aims to make changes in body structure function rather than changes in participation in life situations. I'd leave people to ask questions about that. I know there's a lot of detail in that slide. If you do want to sort of dwell on it further and soak it in, it's in the publication. So key finding here is that, yes, participation focus, it does differ significantly between services. Therapy delivered at the private service was 59% more likely to target participation focused goals than Health A. We did look at differences in children's health condition and children's age, and that was not a determining factor in the nature of the goals that were described. It was the service itself, but also to some extent profession. So I always find this slide piques everybody's interest. How did we compare against the other profession? And again, really interesting here. I think the key message here is a big one for physiotherapy, that the focus of goals did indeed differ significantly between professions. Therapy delivered by physiotherapists was 45% less likely to be participation focused in goals than the nearest ranked profession, which was teachers. SLTs were 3 times more likely to target participation than physiotherapists. And there's some, really interesting contextual arguments that we make around why that might be the case. I was quite intrigued that physios did not score particularly highly on that the specific measurement type questions, that they're clearly worded and clearly measured against something, because I always find physios are generally very, very good at specific measurement, but that didn't come through here. And while all of the comments, all of the ratings around agreed with the child or caregiver, any evidence at all that the goal statement reflected discussion with caregiver or caregiver concerned, it does make me wonder why it wasn't 100% for everyone in family-centred paediatric services. So I think, although high, I think this is an interesting one to really think about. Now, there were also patterns for Māori. They didn't reach significance when we did some modifying effects to the analysis. And so there were, what that means is that there were quite large differences between individual therapists, but there was a bit of pattern around the way therapists engage with Māori compared to no non-Māori, and this pattern was not present for any other ethnicity. So we had a fabulous speaker a couple of months ago, her name I can't remember, but she presented on ethnicity difference with cerebral palsy, and it's another lesson, and if you don't look, you don't find. We looked and we found that therapists were less likely to engage with caregivers when they were Māori compared to non-Māori, and we all know that how whānau is critical and so central to in Māori worldviews. I think everybody here would kind of know that as a fact, and yet this pattern was emerging in the data. So I think it's a real wake-up call to us within our own sector to think about that, and that goals for Māori children were also more likely to be participation focused than non-Māori. Again, a pattern, not statistically significant, but clinically something worth paying attention to. It was a very small sample overall, only 48 clinicians in the scheme of numbers and looking for significance. So bearing that in mind, these are important patterns to be noted. And finally, the questionnaire to therapists that went out, only just to say that intention and belief in the ideas of participation as they knew it was very high. Therapists were really committed to being participation focused in practice in in their minds at least, but when it came to any specific actions that are going to lead to this behavior change, that they self-monitor, that they have a plan, that they've had training, that they seek training, that the culture I work in supports it, all very low. Most therapists also identified that they felt they needed training in participation practice, which is encouraging in terms of insight. So just to summarize the key messages, goals direct intervention. So in terms of anybody looking at service improvements, goals are a really good place to start because it does, a lot of things flow from it. So there were distinctions between service, but I think they say more about culture than funder. However, the ACC reporting requirements do seem to influence practice. Again, something to think about, where most other services in New Zealand aren't required to report to any particular criteria around what they focus on in practices. In terms of clinicians, there were best practice example from all professions. I think that's something really important to take hold of here. So it can be done by all professions. There was clear needs for training around in what is participation, how to do goal setting. It's not the therapist's to-do list. This is not a goal. This is not good goal setting by any standards, and how to effectively engage with Māori. And I think that there's more there around understanding colonialism and culturally safe care beyond basic knowledge. And so I guess the overall conclusion is that targeting and addressing participation in New Zealand is unusual care. Some big questions there, big challenges to physiotherapy in particular around service culture and pre-professional training. And of course, what's happening in the education sector with paediatricians, who are really key part of the patient journey, and other professions involved in the patient journey. Over to Jane.
Yeah, thank you, Fee. That was a whirlwind tour through your big study that you did. That was amazing. Thank you very much. There are a couple of questions up in the chat. And one thing, I guess I put a couple of questions up myself, but Claire from the Ministry of Ed said their outcome measure tool they used is based on presence, participation and learning. And I also wrote in there that Georgia Tiano Fitter was the previous presenter in our very first Lunch and Learn series. And I guess you've written what your conclusions are about targeting, addressing participation and being unusual care and needing further training. And physiotherapy, I mean, I'm a physio, so I have to like listen to that and consider it. And I guess the challenge would be for me, and some of the people have posted there, it's great to highlight why participation may need more focus in undergraduate training and the need for help with setting goals. And I wonder if you have any thoughts on that.
So thanks, Jane. So the clinical audit tool is available online with the publication, and there is a parallel publication which is also referenced here and in the other publication by Colin, who invented the tool. So that's freely available for anyone to do a self-audit on, which can be a private process and might help you to figure out where you're sitting individually as a therapist on this journey. In terms of recruitment to this study, Claire, I'm heartened by your interest in it, even belatedly. There's a range of challenges there. There is a range of challenges there with gatekeepers within Ministry of Education, and within all organisations for that matter. So sometimes the message doesn't go up or the message doesn't go down for getting approval to take part in this study. But keep tuned in with the Paediatric Society. We do often circulate invitations to research such as this. Yeah, nothing also stopping people doing a service-wide audit as well. The ACC involvement in this case, I think we sought responses from services, so a whole service took part in it, and so once we had one large service, we weren't seeking more.
I'm also sorry, this is just like a separate question. I've been thinking here that your first slide talked about the ICF and that body structure, function, activity, participation, environmental factors and things, and that thinking of being part of a multidisciplinary team and other people in the team working, maybe focusing on different specific goals with a family. And I wonder if you're sharing out the goals or focusing on different aspects. I'm curious to think of if maybe the physiotherapists in the teams were focusing on the body structure and function aspect, maybe more. I'm just,
so
I wonder if it's
there was a what seems likely, Jane. However, I suppose the argument for best practice is that participation is everybody's business. So what is it that we're doing with a specific family? What impact will that have on everyday life? And I think so the one around pain is a really interesting one, and to sometimes range of movement is related to that. So maintaining flexibility at the hip, and we know some of the long-term sequelae of that. But what is, in term for a range of reasons, situating or describing that goal in relation to its impact on everyday life now is sort of deemed best practice. And one of the reasons is family engagement in the focus on that goal. That's just one of the reasons. And it does also keep us all pretty honest around when that goal's achieved or not. And so when is pain a problem now in the daily routine, in the context of your everyday life? People can have pain. A lot of people in society have pain that comes and goes, but it doesn't impact on the way that they go about everyday life. And so it might not necessarily be a problem. But where it is a problem, well, what is that problem in everyday life? Or what is that part of everyday life that you want to be different when there is no pain? And so framing the goal in that context supports behavior change, it supports engagement in therapy, and it actually supports achievement of the goal, because we can sometimes not get rid of the pain, but I can play soccer with my mates. And so you might ask the question, well, what's more important, that you're playing soccer with your mates, or that you have less pain on a 10-point pain scale? My pain is managed sufficiently that I can play soccer with my mates. The research would suggest that type of goal is ultimately the outcome that's of more interest and benefit to people overall. I wonder if there's people that would like to ask a question verbally as well. You don't need to be.
I'm just aware of the time, Fee, that we've come to.
Thanks, Jane.
The end of the time, and I think I can stop the recording and people will need to leave, but the chat, I'm hoping that those have been captured. Denise, those ones have been copied, because if we stop the Zoom meeting, they go. And if people come, we'll post them up on Padlet, and Fee will be more than happy to answer those questions again on the Padlet page and continue the discussion. So I just, on behalf of the Paediatric Society, I want to thank you, Fee, for presenting here to us today. It's been stimulating, and it's just such a shame it's such a short little meeting, but it's a taster for those who want to learn some more. And on behalf of the Society, I'd like to thank you all for joining us this year. We look forward to you coming back again next year, and we wish you a very happy and healthy and safe Christmas, and fingers crossed for better things in 2021 in terms of COVID and wherever we head to. So thank you, everyone. Thank you, everyone, for joining us.